"I just need to check my balance," the 90-year-old black woman said, her voice trembling slightly as it echoed to the marble lobby of First National Bank. The millionaire laughed until he saw the screen. Jonathan Mitchell's cruel laughter sliced through the frigid air conditioning like a knife. At 52, he had presided over the bank for a decade, and he was accustomed to handling these situations. People who clearly didn't belong in his elite financial institution. "Ma'am," he announced loudly enough for all the VIP clients in the lobby to hear, "I'm certain there's been some misunderstanding. This is a private institution. Perhaps you're looking for the community bank branch a few blocks away." Dorothy Washington, leaning heavily on her worn wooden cane, held her ground at the main counter. Her 90 years had taught her to recognize condescension, even when wrapped in politeness. Her eyes, still sharp despite her age, showed neither surprise nor anger, only an unsettling calm. "Young man," she replied evenly, withdrawing a crumpled black card from her coat pocket, "I said I need to check my balance. I didn't ask for your opinion on where I should bank." Jonathan examined the card with obvious disdain. It was ancient, its edges worn smooth by time, folded and refolded so many times the numbers were nearly illegible. A joke, clearly. Probably one of those fake promotional cards some companies distributed. "Janet," he called to his senior assistant with a theatrical gesture, "we have yet another attempt at, how should I phrase this, creative use of our services." His voice dripped with sarcasm as several well-dressed customers whispered among themselves, clearly entertained by the spectacle. Dorothy remained perfectly still, but anyone watching closely would have noticed something intriguing in her expression. There wasn't a trace of nervousness or uncertainty. Instead, there was a quiet confidence that exists only in those who have weathered far worse storms. "Mr. Mitchell," Janet whispered, approaching hesitantly, "perhaps we should just verify the card in the system." "Absolutely not," Jonathan interrupted, his voice heavy with theatrical indignation. "I refuse to waste our team's time on this charade." That's when something unexpected happened. Dorothy smiled, not a nervous or pleading smile, but one that carried decades of untold stories. A smile that made Jonathan hesitate for just a split second, as if some primitive part of his brain recognized he was about to make a catastrophic mistake. There, before all those contemptuous stares, she stood firm, like someone guarding a secret too powerful to reveal before its time. And if you're enjoying this story of justice and resilience, don't forget to subscribe, because what's about to unfold will prove that not every battle is won by whoever shouts the loudest. Two security guards approached Dorothy with that peculiar mixture of professionalism and embarrassment that exists only when adults are forced to intimidate an elderly woman. Jonathan Mitchell observed with satisfaction, adjusting the cuffs of his Italian shirt, while mentally calculating how many points this display of authority would earn him with the VIP clients present. "Ma'am," said the taller security guard, visibly uncomfortable, "Mr. Mitchell has requested that we escort you to the exit." Dorothy continued smiling, but something shifted in her eyes, a subtle hardness, as if decades of painful memories had just awakened from hibernation. She recognized his posture. She had grown up in 1940s Alabama, when escorted to the exit was a polite euphemism for something far more violent and degrading. "Young man," she said to the guard, her voice maintaining that same disturbing calm, "I didn't say I was leaving. I said I need to check my balance." Jonathan's laughter ricocheted through the lobby like nails on a chalkboard. "You see, folks," he announced to the customers with a theatrical gesture, "this is precisely the type of situation our security protocols are designed to prevent. Confused individuals, clearly disoriented, attempting to access services they don't comprehend. Mrs. Catherine Pelton, widow of an oil magnate and a 20-year customer, covered her mouth with her Hermes bag to muffle a giggle. "Poor dear," she murmured loud enough for everyone to hear. "Probably Alzheimer's. My housekeeper was like that before. Well, before we had to let her go." Then Dorothy did something no one anticipated. She laughed, not a nervous or embarrassed laugh, but a genuine, rich, deep laugh that reverberated off the marble walls like music. "Alzheimer's," she repeated, shaking her head with authentic amusement. Interesting diagnosis for someone who remembers perfectly the day she worked 14 hours cleaning Mr. Mitchell's grandfather's office in 1955, when he was just another spoiled rich boy destined to inherit everything without lifting a finger. The lobby fell completely silent. Jonathan felt something cold crawl down his spine. His family had founded the bank in 1932, but how could this woman possibly know intimate details about his grandfather? "Excuse me," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "But that's obviously impossible. You would have been 15, Dorothy calmly supplied. "I worked after school and on weekends to help my mother. Your grandfather used to leave lit cigarettes on the marble counters just to see if I'd have the courage to complain. I never did. Of course. We needed the money." Janet, the assistant, swallowed hard. She had worked with the Mitchell family long enough to know stories about the patriarch's notoriously difficult temperament. Dorothy continued, her voice now laden with memories spanning decades. "I remember the day your grandfather told me that people like me should be grateful for the opportunity to serve people like him, that it was our natural role in society." She paused. "Funny how certain family traditions pass from generation to generation, isn't it, young Mitchell?" Jonathan's face visibly reddened. Customers began exchanging uncomfortable glances. What had started as entertainment at an elderly woman's expense was rapidly transforming into something far more complex and disturbing. "Those are just stories," he stammered, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. "Anyone could fabricate them." "Your grandfather had a scar on his left hand," Dorothy said softly, "from when he tried to smash a crystal tumbler over my head when I was 17. He missed and cut himself instead. He told everyone he'd injured himself in a gardening accident." The silence became deafening. Some customers began discreetly departing, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation's direction. Jonathan felt control of the situation slipping completely through his fingers like sand. But what Dorothy said next truly shook the foundations of that temple of privilege. "I spent 70 years wondering if I'd ever have the opportunity to show the Mitchells what a person like me can truly achieve when she stops accepting being treated as invisible." Each humiliation Jonathan attempted to impose only fueled something inside Dorothy that her oppressors couldn't see, a silent strength nourished by the very injustice they sought to perpetuate. What these privileged people didn't understand was that every act of contempt was writing their own condemnation. And Dorothy Washington had learned long ago that patience wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Jonathan Mitchell felt his hands trembling imperceptibly as he struggled to regain control of a situation spiraling away from him like water through his fingers. The mention of intimate details about his grandfather had planted a seed of doubt that was rapidly growing. But his arrogance wouldn't permit a 90-year-old black woman to destroy his reputation before the city's most important clients. "Security!" he shouted again, his voice now laden with barely concealed hysteria. "I want this woman removed immediately, and if she resists, call the police." Dorothy remained motionless, but something changed in her posture. She straightened her shoulders, and for a moment, everyone in the lobby could see not the frail Lady Jonathan hoped to intimidate, but the resilient woman who had survived decades of Jim Crow, segregation, and systematic humiliation. Her eyes met his with an intensity that made him involuntarily step back. "Young Mitchell," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Do you really want to call the police on a customer of your own bank? Because I'm certain that would make a fascinating story in the local newspapers." Just then, the bank's front door opened and a tall man in a dark suit entered with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with every inch of the building. Gerald Thompson, 58, senior vice president and founding board member of First National Bank. Jonathan's stomach dropped as he recognized the man who had signed his last performance review. "Jonathan," Gerald said calmly, though steel underlay his voice, "could you explain why I'm hearing shouting from my 10th-floor office?" Thompson surveyed the scene. Security guards positioned around an elderly woman, embarrassed customers whispering among themselves, and Jonathan visibly sweating through his $1,000 Italian shirt. His trained executives, I immediately detected the unspoken racial tension permeating the entire situation. "Gerald, thank goodness you're here," Jonathan said, forcing a relieved smile. "We have a situation with a clearly confused individual attempting to use fraudulent documents." Gerald interrupted, completely ignoring Jonathan and walking directly to Dorothy. "Mrs. Washington, how lovely to see you again. I hope you're not experiencing any difficulties with our services." The silence that followed was so absolute you could have heard a pin drop on the polished marble. Jonathan felt the world spin around him. How did Gerald Thompson, the most powerful man in the bank after the CO, know this woman by name? Dorothy smiled for the first time since entering the bank, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile of someone who had just watched the first piece of a complex puzzle fall perfectly into place. "Hello, Gerald. Actually, I am encountering some interesting obstacles. It appears young Mitchell believes my appearance doesn't match the clientele you serve." Gerald Thompson slowly turned to Jonathan, and if looks could kill, the bank president would have been reduced to ash. "Jonathan, would you accompany me to my office?" "Now." "But Gerald, you don't understand. Jonathan tried to explain, his voice rising an octave. "Now, Jonathan." Gerald's voice echoed through the lobby with absolute authority. While Jonathan was practically dragged by the arm toward the elevators, Dorothy remained in the lobby center, watching the first phase of her quiet vindication unfold. The clients who minutes earlier had whispered cruel jokes now avoided her gaze, clearly realizing they had gravely underestimated the situation. Mrs. Catherine Pelton, who had made the Alzheimer's comment, approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, but do you actually know Mr. Thompson?" Dorothy turned to her with that same unsettling smile. "Honey, Gerald Thompson was my student at a Brooklyn public school in the 1980s. I was a mathematics teacher, and he was just another bright black child who needed someone to believe in him." She paused, letting the information sink in. Funny how life comes full circle, isn't it? Mrs. Pelton's face turned white as paper. The realization that she had mocked a respected educator, someone who had shaped the life of one of the city's most powerful men, hit her like a freight train. Other conversations in the lobby ceased abruptly as people began connecting the dots. In the elevator, Gerald maintained a deafening silence while Jonathan desperately tried to salvage his career. "Gerald, you have to understand." She seemed completely out of place. Anyone would have. Any racist person. Gerald cut in coldly. "Dorothy Washington isn't just a client, Jonathan. She was my teacher. She was the only person who believed that a poor kid from Brooklyn could become something beyond society's limited expectations." The elevator stopped on the 10th floor, but Gerald didn't move. "You want to know who Dorothy Washington really is? She taught mathematics for 40 years in some of the city's most challenging schools. She mentored hundreds of children that society had abandoned, and when she retired, she invested every penny of her pension and savings into a fund providing scholarships for disadvantaged youth." Jonathan felt his legs buckle. How? How could I have known that?" "Because you should have asked before publicly humiliating her," Gerald replied, his voice thick with contempt. "Because a true leader doesn't judge clients by their appearance. Because your job is to serve, not entertain your wealthy friends at other people's expense." When the elevator doors opened, Gerald walked straight to his office, leaving Jonathan trembling in the hallway. Through the glass windows, Jonathan could see Gerald making phone calls, and each number dialed seemed to seal another aspect of his professional future. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Dorothy had settled quietly into one of the leather armchairs, watching bank employees approach with expressions of growing respect and curiosity. Janet, the assistant who had been instructed to verify the card, now approached with tablet and a completely transformed demeanor. "Mrs. Washington," she said respectfully, "Mr. Thompson has asked me to assist you with any banking needs. Would you like to check your balance in a more private setting?" Dorothy smiled again, but this time with something almost maternal in her expression. "No, dear. I think we'll do it right here where everyone can see." She paused, observing the faces now watching her with curiosity and growing respect. After all, transparency is important in financial institutions, isn't it? What these privileged people couldn't comprehend was that every insult, every attempt at humiliation, every contemptuous look had only strengthened the determination of a woman who had dedicated her entire life to proving that dignity isn't measured by appearances or bank accounts. And now, at 90, Dorothy Washington was about to teach them a lesson none of them would ever forget. But the true extent of her quiet preparation was only beginning to unfold. Janet approached Dorothy with the tablet, her hands trembling slightly as she entered the account number into the banking system. The lobby had transformed into a silent theater where every customer, employee, and security guard waited with bated breath for the outcome of this extraordinary situation that had begun as cruel entertainment and now seemed to possess far greater dimensions. "Mrs. Washington," Janet murmured, checking the data 3 times before speaking. "Would you like me to read the balance aloud, or—" "Loud and clear, dear," Dorothy replied calmly, settling into the leather armchair as if in her own living room. "Transparency is important, especially regarding financial education." Janet cleared her throat, her eyes fixed on the tablet screen, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "The current balance of the main checking account is $847,000. Her voice trembled on the final digit. A collective murmur swept through the lobby. Mrs. Catherine Pelton dropped her Hermes bag on the marble floor with a thud. Other clients who moments before had whispered cruel jokes now completely avoided Dorothy's gaze, their faces burning with shame. "But that's just one of the accounts, isn't it?" Dorothy asked gently, as if inquiring about the weather. Janet checked again, her fingers sliding across the screen. "Yes, ma'am. There's also the education savings account with $1.2 million, the investment account with $3.8 million, and—" she paused, rereading the numbers, "the educational endowment fund with $12.4 million. The silence that followed was so profound you could hear the almost imperceptible hum of the air conditioning. Dorothy Washington, the 90-year-old woman Jonathan Mitchell had attempted to evict as a confused vagrant, had nearly $18 million distributed across multiple accounts at the city's most exclusive bank. At that moment, the elevator opened with a soft chime, revealing Jonathan Mitchell staggering out like a man who had just received a terminal diagnosis. His face was completely pale. Sweat stained his $1,000 Italian shirt, and his hands trembled visibly as he struggled to regain some fragment of composure. Gerald Thompson appeared directly behind him, his expression a mask of restrained professional fury. "Jonathan," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "I'd like you to come forward and properly apologize to Mrs. Washington." I didn't know," Jonathan stammered, his eyes darting between Dorothy and the judgmental faces surrounding him. The realization of his mistake's magnitude was crystallizing in his brain, like ice forming in standing water. "Didn't know what exactly?" Dorothy asked, rising slowly from her chair with the dignity of royalty. "Didn't know I was wealthy? Didn't know I was respected? Or didn't know you should treat all human beings with basic dignity, regardless of their appearance?" Jonathan opened and closed his mouth several times like a fish out of water, unable to formulate any response that wouldn't further incriminate him. Dorothy continued, her voice maintaining that unsettling calm that had destabilized Jonathan from the moment she entered. "Gerald told me about your customer service philosophy, how you encourage staff to judge customers by appearances, how you turn public humiliation into entertainment for your wealthy friends." The crowd in the lobby was now completely absorbed by the drama unfolding before them. Several customers retrieved their phones, clearly recording or live-streaming this historic confrontation. "Mrs. Washington, please understand that Jonathan tried to explain, but she raised her hand delicately, silencing him with the authority of someone who had controlled classrooms full of rebellious teenagers for 4 decades. "Young Mitchell," she said, steel in her voice, "now, do you want to know why a retired public school teacher has $18 million in this bank?" Jonathan nodded silently, his throat too dry to form words. "Because," Dorothy continued, "during 40 years of teaching, I religiously invested 60% of my salary. I lived in modest apartments, bought used cars, wore clothes until they were threadbare, and put every extra penny into the stock market. Not because I was greedy, but because I understood something you clearly never learned." She paused, letting the tension build in the silent lobby. "I understood that education and intelligent investing are the only things that can break cycles of poverty and prejudice. So I didn't just invest my own money. I invested in the education of hundreds of children that people like you would dismiss based solely on appearance." Gerald Thompson seized a moment to approach with a folder of documents. "Jonathan," You should know that Mrs. Washington is also the largest individual contributor to our bank's scholarship program. She has funded the college education of 47 young people over the past decade. Jonathan's legs nearly buckled. Not only had he publicly humiliated a multi-million-dollar client, but it attacked the very woman who represented the philanthropic values the bank loved promoting in its advertising campaigns. And there's more, Dorothy added, retrieving her cell phone from her pocket with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You know, modern technology is fascinating. I've been recording our entire conversation since the moment I walked in here. The blood drained completely from Jonathan's face. In an era where viral videos could destroy careers within hours, he had just starred in the perfect example of institutional discrimination captured in high definition. Gerald, Dorothy continued calmly, I think the board of directors will be very interested in reviewing Jonathan's customer service policies, don't you think? Especially considering this bank depends on its reputation for integrity to retain clients like me. Gerald Thompson nodded gravely. I've already contacted all board members for an emergency meeting at 5 o'clock this afternoon. Jonathan, you're suspended immediately while we investigate this incident and your general management practices. Jonathan tried to protest, but his voice emerged as a hoarse whisper. Gerald, you can't. I have a family, responsibilities, and I'm 90 years old and have spent 7 decades of my life proving that human dignity is not for sale. Dorothy interrupted. Every dollar I've earned, every investment I've made, every young life I've helped transform, all of that was possible because I refused to accept that people like you would determine my worth. She approached Jonathan, who instinctively recoiled, his body trembling with the realization that he had just destroyed his own career for a few moments of cruel entertainment. The difference between us, young Mitchell, Dorothy said softly, is that you use your position to diminish others, while I use mine to elevate them. You turn power into a weapon. I turn investment into opportunity. Mrs. Catherine Pelton, who had mocked Dorothy earlier, approached hesitantly. Mrs. Washington, I would like to apologize deeply. My behavior was inexcusable. Dorothy turned to her with a maternal expression. Dear, we all make mistakes. The question is whether we choose to learn from them or repeat them. As Jonathan was escorted from the bank by security guards, a cruel irony considering he had tried to do the same to Dorothy, the elderly woman calmly returned to her chair. Janet, she said to the assistant still holding the tablet, I'd like to make some transfers today. I have a new class of students who need college scholarships. What those privileged people finally understood was that true wealth had never been measured by Dorothy Washington's bank balance, but by her ability to transform injustice into education, humiliation into growth, and prejudice into opportunity. As Jonathan exited that bank for the last time as an employee, carrying only the wreckage of his arrogance, Dorothy remained as she had always been, an unstoppable force of dignity and purpose, proving that some battles are won not by shouting louder, but by remaining standing when everyone else falls. 6 months later, First National Bank had become a completely transformed institution. Dorothy Washington walked the halls that had once rejected her, now as an official member of the board of directors, the first black woman to hold such a position in the bank's century-long history. Jonathan Mitchell had been terminated the day after the confrontation. The video of his public humiliation went viral, accumulating over 12 million views within a week and becoming a case study on institutional discrimination. His attempt to find employment at other financial institutions were systematically rejected. The banking world is small, and his reputation had preceded him. Ironic justice, Gerald Thompson commented during a board meeting, reviewing the bank's financial reports since implementing the inclusion policy suggested by Mrs. Washington. Our clientele has increased by 340%, and profits have reached historic highs. Dorothy had used her influence to revolutionize not only the bank's practices, but its entire corporate culture. The educational scholarship program she funded was now administered directly by the institution, benefiting hundreds of young people from underserved communities each year. That December afternoon, she sat in her new office on the 15th floor when Janet, now promoted to inclusive service manager, brought her a special letter. Mrs. Washington, I received correspondence I thought you'd like to see personally. The letter was from Marcus Thompson, one of the young people who had benefited from Dorothy's scholarship program, now an engineering graduate from MIT. Dear Mrs. Washington, the handwritten text read, I will never have sufficient words to thank you for how your generosity changed my life. Today, I received my first paycheck as an aerospace engineer at NASA, and it all started with your courage to confront prejudice. Dorothy smiled, filing the letter with the other 847 she had received from former beneficiaries over the years. Each represented a transformed life, an opportunity created from the injustice they had tried to impose on her. Across town, Jonathan Mitchell worked as a clerk in a department store, a job he had obtained by concealing his true identity from a manager. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was now experiencing for the first time what it meant to be judged by appearance, to be invisible, to be treated as disposable. Mrs. Catherine Pelton, the customer who had mocked Dorothy, became one of the program's biggest advocates, contributing substantial amounts annually. I learned that day, she confessed during a charity event, that dignity and wisdom aren't privileges exclusive to those born with money. The previous week, Dorothy had been awarded the title of Honorary Citizen of the City, recognized for her contributions to education and social justice. During her speech, she had said, true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we plant. Every seed of opportunity we offer today becomes a tree of possibilities tomorrow. The bank now proudly displayed a sign at its main entrance, Dorothy Washington Educational Center, where opportunities are born of dignity. Gerald Thompson, now CEO after the previous president's early retirement, often reflected on how that day had changed not only the institution, but his own vision of leadership. Mrs. Washington taught me that true power lies not in controlling people, but in empowering them. Dorothy, now 91, continued visiting the bank weekly, not to check balances, but to personally interview each new scholarship recipient. Each meeting was a renewal of purpose, a confirmation that her quiet battle against prejudice continued bearing fruit decades later. The lesson she left engraved in that institution's history was simple but revolutionary. When we face injustice with dignity, patience with purpose, and humiliation with determination, we don't merely win. We transform the battlefield itself into fertile ground for lasting change. Jonathan had tried to destroy Dorothy, but ended up destroying only himself. Dorothy had learned that true revenge isn't repaying the harm done to you. It's achieving success your enemies could never imagine, and using that success to ensure no one else suffers the same injustice. If this story of resilience touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experience in the comments, because sometimes justice needs a little push from us.